Well, good morning and welcome back to our In Conversation series when we think about issues of life and faith and what Christianity might have to say to that. This morning we're going to be thinking about faith in society, or public theology as it has come to be known. And I've told Calum not to get excited about it as it's one of his passions, and we'll hear a bit about that in just a moment. But we thought, by way of introduction, actually, this subject that we're going to be thinking about this morning is perhaps more relevant now than it has ever been. If we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, if you dare, you'll remember that churches were closed and public worship was almost viewed in the same stream as the hospitality sector and the entertainment sector as well, which is a really interesting dynamic at play there by the government, I think. And so we want to begin our time together this morning by actually just saying that Christian worship and the practice of Christian faith in society is more important now than it has ever been, which is partly why we're doing this series. And partly why we feel called to do the jobs that we do. So, Calum, without getting on your high horse, why are you so passionate about this issue of faith in the public realm?
It's what it's all about. Faith isn't just to be kind of hidden within the four walls of a church building once a week, but it's what Jesus calls us to do. Mark Hackney, our new reader at St Michael's, who was licensed last week and will welcome officially on Sunday, if you talk to him about his story of faith, he talks about the Beatitudes, and he says the Beatitudes is basically a political manifesto that turns things upside down. And I remember when I was doing my undergraduate degree and preparing to do my dissertation, I decided I really wanted to do something about how does faith impact public society, because I was still quite interested in politics at the time. And my supervising lecturer was someone that was involved in the William Temple Foundation, and he introduced me to this book, Christianity and the Social Order, which was published by the then Archbishop of Canterbury, which was William Temple. And it was published in 1942, and it was a booklet, a really short booklet. It's only got 78 pages in it, that basically said if we want our nation to be transformed and we want our nation to be living out Christian values, this is what we should be doing. And it was out of this publication that things like the NHS appeared, because William Temple had inspired people through his writings. And I'm really aware that there are people that say the church shouldn't interfere in politics, and actually the first two chapters of this book explain exactly why we should interfere and how we should do it, because religion and politics are not two things that are to be separated. If you look at the Constitution of the United States of America, it makes a very clear distinction between church and state. And yet you look at what happens in practice, there has never been a president of the United States of America who hasn't been a Christian. In fact, some people would go as far as to say it would be impossible for someone who isn't a Christian to be elected the president of the United States, just because there's a distinction between the leadership of the church and the leadership of the nation officially. There isn't, because faith is at the heart of what I believe makes a good society and a good place to live. A few years ago, when we had the first general election that was actually scheduled because they changed the rules, the Archbishop of Canterbury produced a new book, and it was Justin Welby this time, and it was called Reimagining Britain. Again, it's a good read, maybe not as good as William Temple, but it was all right.
And a bit longer.
And he said this, Justin Welby said, "The church is capable of inspiring solidarity in our society when it engages in a way that highlights the positive impact that a commitment to community can have." I went on in my dissertation, I've been going on a little bit now, but I went on in my dissertation and my master's thesis to basically say, if you want to create community and society that is for everyone, that makes everyone equal and is just and fair and right, I believe the Bible is the best place to start.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another Archbishop of Canterbury, we're not promoting them, I promise. Rowan Williams, in the book that we've been following in this series, says it tells us that the state is not unimportant or subordinate to some higher earthly power. It is relative in the perspective of God. And so being disciples means being called to see others, and especially others in profound need, from the perspective of an eternal and unflinching, unalterable love. So that actually we have to start from a position of faith, and that everything we do and think and believe and see even in our world should flow out of that we should be able to kind of look upon our society the way that God looks upon it.
Yeah, and I think the reason why we're called to get involved and to be good citizens and to allow our faith to shape what goes on outside of church is because as Christians we're not called to play a role in it as part of a hierarchy. And we were actually having this conversation in a meeting at the diocese this morning.
Yeah.
Christians aren't part of a hierarchy because there is God and then there is us. There is no hierarchy in terms of vicar and bishop, and although that kind of stuff does exist, and then laity and readers, actually we're all equal. We're all equal members of the same body. And when you take the hierarchy out of society, when you actually understand that we are all equal, actually it comes back to solidarity. We all depend on one another, and therefore we have to serve one another in love.
I think we saw that at the very beginning of the pandemic in a really powerful way, didn't we? We all came together because in one sense, we were all sad about the fact that we were locked up in our homes, but we were also all really mindful of those who were most vulnerable in our communities, perhaps in a way that we hadn't been previously. And we looked out for each other. Here in Bramall we had a helping hands group that was set up,
and they've been brilliant and are brilliant and are already thinking about Christmas and how they can support the isolated and vulnerable in Bramall. And that's just kind of 3 or 4 mums that got together and said we've got to do something here, and made a profound impact and difference in our community, and they've won awards and things. And part of me is ashamed that I didn't get more involved, but actually they've done a much better job than I could ever do.
Yeah, and I think there's something really interesting in that actually, because it's not come out of the church, as you say. It was just a group of mums who decided actually this was what we needed to do. But to me they are an example of what the church should be. It's certainly an example to me of the ministry I have in Stockport, meeting those with very particular needs, particularly among the homeless, and those who are deprived in lots of ways and require support from local food banks and such. But actually it just takes something small like that, doesn't it, to see a need and to say I can meet that, and that comes out of that recognition actually that we are all equal, that we're all on a level playing field. To come back to Paul's image of the body, each part needs each other.
Yeah, and I think this is where we as a church can really play a role. If you look at government, it's not particularly locally focused anymore. It's quite regional or even national. But if you go to any local community, you can guarantee that in every community somewhere there is a church, there is the people of God, and there are people there that are prepared to shape that community's life around gospel ideals, which is centered solely upon loving other people as equals, serving each other as brothers and sisters, and seeking to do good in all places. Another book we've quoted from quite a lot is Why Bother with Church by Sam Allegory, and he says the local church is the church of God in that particular locale. They are the embodiment of the universal church. The church functions like an embassy of the new society that God is creating through Christ. The local church is a small part of heavenly territory in this world. And that for me is why faith has to explode out of the church buildings and just overrun into everyday society, in the way we operate as a community, in the way politics happens. Because actually we're not about blue or red or yellow or whatever political colour you are. We're about the kingdom of heaven, and wherever we can take the kingdom of heaven, then surely we're doing good. And I think all of us as Christians can do that in really simple and easy ways. I think the first is actually praying for our local community. Yeah. So just praying for the streets around where we live, praying for the schools, praying for our local leaders. I pray for our local councillors regularly, and regularly I just drop them an email and say thank you for all that you're doing. Rather than just sending them complaints or emails when things are going wrong, I just try to say thank you. And they generally quite a few times come back and say, oh, we're not really doing anything at the moment because the council isn't meeting or whatever. And I go, yeah, but thank you for being our local leaders. Just saying thank you and praying is the biggest way in which we can change our society and our nation for the better.
Yeah, definitely. But I think there are also more practical ways in which we can do that as well. It's been really interesting over the last few weeks. I don't know whether you saw it, but the Archbishops of Canterbury and York wrote a letter to all the bishops in the Church of England, which was then kind of cast out more widely.
If you're a PCC member, it was sent out to you with the agenda for next week.
And in that letter, it was really interesting to basically hear the Archbishops almost return to what the Church of England has always been about in light of the pandemic. So, you know, at the very beginning, they were very much supportive of what the government were wanting to do. And they, you know, agreed with the closure of churches, and to some extent they kind of took that one step further with even not allowing clergy in to the buildings and things like that. But as time has gone on and they've realised actually that we are on this journey for the long haul, they've realised actually the church needs to be open and active in every community in which it's set. And so it's almost returned to what it's always been about in terms of the local church serving the needs of the local community. And in that letter they actually talk about very practical ways in which we can do that in terms of caring for the vulnerable, you know, supporting those in need through some of the things we've already talked about this evening and talked about as the weeks have gone on. And I think it's just really important for us actually to say, yes, it is very important to pray, and that should always be our first motive. But actually, I believe anyway that often we are the answer to our own prayers sometimes, that God asks us to do as well as to pray.
Yeah, Jesus said we are the light of the world, and he also said we're the salt of the earth. Light brings kind of injustice and wrong visible, so something can be done about it. It creates a space where darkness and evil cannot happen because light is there. Salt brings out flavour, it brings out goodness, it preserves, and that is what we're called to do. If the church had remained private in all its existence and hadn't interfered with society, we wouldn't have seen mass education for all. If the church had remained private, we wouldn't have seen mass healthcare for all. We wouldn't have seen care homes appear. We wouldn't have seen things like almshouses, protection for the poor appear. The church has been involved throughout history with the changing of society for the better, and just because we've seen the privatisation of all those things and the state take those things on, and being told by the state that religion is meant to be private, doesn't mean we have to sit back and agree. I believe that being told that faith and religion is a private affair is one of the biggest lies out there, and yeah, I'd probably even say that it is a lie of the devil, and the more we believe it, the less we are actually living out our faith. We are called to live our faith out day to day in the places we are with the talents that we have, sharing the light of Christ and making our society richer and preserving the goodness that is in it, just by simply turning up and being active as a good citizen and saying, I'm not doing this because I agree with the government that's in office. I'm not doing this because I'm a member of this political party or that political party or that pressure group, but I'm doing it because Jesus Christ requires it of me, and I am representing the kingdom of God here in this place.
Yeah, and I think we almost have to reclaim some of that stuff that
Definitely
the church started. We both went to the University of Chester for our undergraduate degrees, and that institution itself was set up by the Church of England, originally to train teachers to then go on to provide that mass education which Calum's just talked about, but which over time has expanded and grown. And one of the things I particularly looked at when I was there was actually, how do we hold on to our Christian identity? How do we remain distinctively people of faith as we grow and as institutions like that understandably and for the good get bigger? And I think we want to say that actually to a lot of areas of life that is true. As soon as we get bigger, it's easy for us to lose that thing that makes us distinctive, that thing that makes us who we are. In a book group that I'm leading as part of the parish of Stockport, we were thinking about the Ten Commandments last week, and how they are basically there in our society's morals and values.
Definitely.
They make up our law system. And yet actually ask people to name them, to put them in order, or even if they follow them or they come naturally to them, the answer is probably no, or they manage 3 or 4. And actually it's really important for us, I think, as people of faith, to almost reclaim some of that stuff that has either been lost completely or is hidden behind some of the growth and the expansion which these institutions naturally bring.
Yeah. Jess and I are called to work in the church, to serve the church, to equip the church for its mission and ministry. We're not called to be members of the NHS. We're not called to be teachers. We're not called to be police officers. We're not called to be accountants or business managers or oil executives or road sweepers or council planners or any other sort of job. We've been called particularly to the church, but you have been called to a particular place, to a particular profession, or you were called to that profession, you've retired, but you still have the skills to support that profession. And you are the representative of Christ in that place. And our job is to equip you to serve Jesus in that place. So pray for your workmates, pray for your colleagues, pray for those that live around you. That's where it starts. And the next step is, when you see them in need, to serve them without hesitation, with love and with care. And when they say why, say, because Jesus requires it of me, and because he loves me and I love him, so I serve you, because he loves you too. That is the simplest way in which faith can play a part in wider society. And the more the church does this, the more confident the church will do this, and the more our society will change for the better.
Yeah, and I think it's just really important for us to say at this stage, actually, that those places where you are called to be, those things that you are called to do, they are as important as the things we are called to do, if not
probably
more
more
so.
important than what we're called to do.
And we really want to affirm that, and we want our churches to be places that encourage you and equip you in that. We're sorry if we haven't done that in the past, but we are wholeheartedly committed to that, as is the Church of England through one of its new projects called Everyday Faith. Do look it up. But it's basically, how can we support you to live out your faith Monday to Saturday?
I think I'm going to close with a comment that was made in a meeting, a committee for ministry meeting this morning that Jess and I were part of, by the Director of Ministry for the Diocese of Chester, who on Sunday last week there was a service at Chester Cathedral that licensed and authorised for ministry various folk in this diocese. And so readers were licensed, and Mark was licensed by the Bishop of Chester as a reader. And readers wear robes in church, a bit like clergy, but they have a blue scarf. But there's also another thing called Pastoral Workers, and Andrew Millington and John Baker are pastoral workers at St Michael's, and I think you might have a couple at Stockport. And they don't get robes, they just get a little pin badge that's impossible to see on a webcam. The Director of Ministry said, actually, they are better at proclaiming the word of Christ because they don't need robes. I need robes to be able to do it. In fact, I love hiding behind my dog collar because it gets me over the first hurdle. And so I have so much pride in Christians who are able to go out into the workplace without needing to wear a dog collar, without needing to wear a cross, and still proclaim Jesus Christ in their words and their actions, because I've got it easy with the dog collar and the robes. I need the dog collar and robes to do it. You don't, and you do an amazing job at it when you pray and when you serve and when you love, because you're doing it because Jesus asked it of you, and you do it without the symbols that I need to do it.
You're doing it because it is who you are. And I think that's probably a good place to end.
Yes.
For today. We've probably gone on for far too long.
But hey, it was important.
But it's important, and as we said at the beginning, it's perhaps more relevant now than it ever has been, or certainly it has been for a long time. And so we just felt it right to spend some time thinking about that this morning. Next week, we're back with the final chapter.
Where are we heading?
In Rowan's book, when he gets us to think about life in the Spirit. And I suspect we're probably going down the line of the fruit of the Spirit.
All right.
And the gifts of the Spirit as well. So do join us for that. And as always, we value your feedback. If there's anything you particularly want us to be thinking about as we move on from this series, then do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. But until then, take care. God bless.
Bye.